Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. I've just done Ange Postecoglou's press conference ahead of the Man City game on Wednesday. I can't say there was sort of loads of news today. I think we've spoken to Ange quite a lot recently. There's been a lot of games, and this press conference felt like, I suppose, because the form has improved, and there isn't much news regarding sort of returning players from injury. There aren't as many obvious questions to ask at the moment, so that was kind of how it felt. But there's still enough sort of talking points, and I feel like I want to talk more widely about this fixture in particular. So I'll come on to that. But I think the fact from the open section, the most interesting quote, at least from Ange, was that he doesn't care about assists. He made quite a funny line about assists when he was asked about Dane Scarlett getting, I think, 2 assists in a goal since coming back. He said assists are one of the most pointless statistics, which is quite amusing, really. Something that I'm not sure I completely wholeheartedly share, but I do sort of see his point. There are times when you watch a game and a brilliant goal is scored. This obviously is most relevant to fantasy football, and the guy who nudges the ball to the guy who hits the 30-yarder gets an assist, and it is somewhat ridiculous. But it is part of the game now. I don't know if it's fantasy football, the influence from America, who are sort of obsessed with stats in their sports, has influenced it that way. But look, I mean, even James Maddison the other day when we were speaking to him, and if you haven't seen that video that I did the other day on his comments and his hopes for England, go check it out. But even he was talking about his numbers being good, both from goals and assists. So it's something that players are very aware of. They know that, I guess they're judged that way, but Ange made quite a funny comment about that, sort of, I guess, overstating their importance. It'd actually be interesting to speak to him about what he thinks instead when you're talking about creative players, how else he judges them. So if it's not assists, obviously goals, but I mean, what particular stat would be interesting? But that's one for another time, I suppose. A lot of the stuff we sort of went over today was kind of old ground to a certain extent. Jed Spencer's impressive rise. He's been asked a lot about that recently. I mean, team news. The issue there is that no one really is back. That has been missing recently. I mean, the good news is that everyone came through unscathed from the Ipswich match who were involved there, but still the likes of Solanke, Van der Ven, Romero, Charlison, he's saying 7 to 10 days, which is similar to what he said before. I don't think any of us were really expecting them to be rushed back for this one. And I suppose it remains to be seen with the 7 to 10 day deadline whether they'll be fit for the first leg against Eze Alkmaar or not. Ben Davis, he says, has been carrying a knock for a while, and has sort of played on with it. And he stressed the importance that he sees that there's a run of fixtures after this Man City game, I guess. Sort of 4 fixtures, I guess. Or maybe he was including this one, I'm not sure. But 4 fixtures which he feels can sort of define their season. Obviously, the Europa League games coming up are massive, but also this ambition to get in amongst it in the league and have it not be a write-off. So he wants players to be as fit and as many available during that period as possible. So he doesn't see the point in rushing players back. Also, you've got to remember, yes, that first leg against Alkmaar is massive, but obviously there's 2 legs, and in between there we've got an international break. So if there is the risk of bringing players back, sort of rushing them ahead of that international break, I get the sort of the logical thinking behind not rushing them back, given them they'll have a bit more time ahead of the next fixture because of that international break, and obviously not playing the FA Cup. So that was his rationale that he was talking about. Interestingly, Timo Werner was available last week. The first game against Ipswich was the first game he was available since having that hamstring injury. He was just left out of the squad completely. And I do wonder, with Werner, who I'm aware is not Spurs' favourite player, fans' favourite player, and is probably the only player that Ange Postecoglou has criticised heavily in public, even though he would see it as feedback, and that's the way he described it. I'm wondering how much he'll be involved between now and the end of the season if Spurs have their fully fit squad. He's obviously a lone player. A decision, I'm told, hasn't been made yet on whether they'll keep him or not, sign him permanently, even though in Germany they're reporting that that's not going to happen. I'd be really surprised, put it that way, if they did decide to sign him permanently, given how it's gone for Timo Werner. And if that is the case, if it's if you've got a fully fit squad to pick from, what is the point in blocking, say, Mikey Moore's progress and picking Werner ahead of him? So I'll be intrigued to see if he gets selected against City on the bench, I would imagine, on Wednesday, given that he was the one who set up Johnson for that 4th goal and that 4-0 win against City. So he has contributed against City more than anyone this season. Obviously, he scored his only goal, that brilliant goal he scored against City in the League Cup, was obviously, as I say, against City. So I wonder on that one, but I just wouldn't be surprised if he didn't play as much between now and the end of the season if Spurs have a fully fit squad, kind of for the obvious reasons. If they aren't looking to keep him, what is the point in like I say, blocking players who are going to be here for a long-term future? So obviously City, this is a chance for Ange to get a hat-trick of wins over Manchester City this season, over Pep Guardiola, to add to a hat-trick of wins already against Manchester United. To add already to a hat-trick of winning against Manchester United. And that shouldn't be overlooked, Pep Guardiola. That's pretty impressive. I'm not sure that's happened too often, although Spurs do obviously have a great recent history of being a bit of a bogey team against Guardiola's City, particularly at home, and basically downplayed the significance of that, as he always does. Historically, unless a game's been quite recent, he doesn't see much of an influence on an upcoming game. The only time he sort of said there was one was when they played Liverpool in the first leg of the Carabao Cup, having played them 17 days prior in the Premier League. He sort of conceded that there was a relevance there, but most of the time he sees them as completely different games, particularly if they've happened under previous 10 years of other managers. He doesn't see the relevance at all. But obviously it'd be quite a feat to do that against both Manchester sides, and particularly Guardiola City, as difficult as their time as they've been having. A rough trot was the phrase that Ange used to describe City's season, I suppose. They're going through a transitional season, aren't they? They've obviously got a lot of players coming towards the end, the likes of De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva maybe. I mean, Jack Grealish, don't know what's going to happen to him. A lot of injuries as well, obviously not to the same extent as Tottenham. And they're bringing in new players. I mean, Omar Mamouche, interestingly, was a player that I'd heard Spurs were interested in before he signed for City. But obviously, he's gone to City. He's had a slow introduction, I suppose, but that hat-trick against Newcastle showed clearly he's got great quality. And Kusanov, other players they've brought in, they're going through this transitional phase. But this is a good chance for Spurs, I suppose, to add to their momentum they seem to be gaining within the league. He looked back on that 4-0 win. Obviously, it's the standout result, really, of his tenure. And he said, obviously, the scoreline is super convincing, but it was more about the quality of the finishing that was the difference between the two sides that day. And that's right, actually. I mean, City did have a lot of chances. They couldn't take them, but Tottenham were brilliantly clinical that day. Maddison, front and centre. Porro took his goal, and obviously Johnson at the end. Couldn't really miss, but he was in the right position. City Spurs, that was really, really clinical that day. If they can replicate that tomorrow, then City are going to have a real tough game. I mean, Ange sort of was kind of looking back at his season to a certain extent and saying how it's really been against the weaker sides that they've, or supposed weaker sides, or the way he put it, the teams that are struggling in the league where they've had their own struggles. It's against the bigger teams that they've done quite well, and that is the case. It does feel like Tottenham are under Postecoglou, are quite a big game side, and it's however you want to sort of argue it, really. I mean, on the one hand, it shows you what's possible from them, but it also must be so frustrating when they can't turn up against the so-called lesser sides, and that is the challenge that Postecoglou has got to overcome during his time here. I mean, it's sort of really underlined by this mad statistic where Tottenham's goal difference, despite being in 12th, is plus 15, which is exactly the same as City's, who are in 4th, I believe, at the moment. Plus 15 as well for them. They've scored, Tottenham, one more goal than City. They've got 53 and conceded 38. City's is 52 and conceded 37. 53, I believe, is the highest, second highest rather, after Liverpool in the league. And to be honest, this season it feels like Liverpool and everybody else. So that underlines, how well they're doing from that front. And the goals conceded isn't really that high, relatively, definitely for a position they're in. It just sort of underlines how frustrating the season must be for Postecoglou and for fans, because they know what's possible, what can be possible when you look at those numbers. And normally those numbers are an indication of how well a team is doing. It's quite rare. It's very rare to see a team as low down in the league have as high a goal difference. In the same way that to have a team right at the top with like a minus goal difference, like United had a couple of years ago on Ten Hag, is ridiculous as well. That hardly ever happens. It's normally quite a good indication of how well a team is going to do, how many goals they score. and how many they concede. I mean, it sounds obvious, but that is just the case that it is. So it shows you, that Tottenham, in a way, despite having this crazy season full of injuries and full of disappointing results, even with games when they didn't have loads of injuries, such as the home defeat to Ipswich, the underlying numbers suggest they're not too far away, and should give a lot of promise and reason for belief going forward, I suppose. And yet, I guess statistics, as Ange pointed out for his assist comment, can sort of prove anything you want. I do feel like that statistic in football, sometimes we can be overly reliant on statistics, and you can argue your case in a lot of different ways when you using statistics however you want to use them. But I do believe that those stats in particular about goals scored and goal difference are pretty crucial. So anyway, the other comments he made about City was he's saying basically the dominance they've had has been amazing, but it just the nature of elite sport is it's not sustainable to be able to be at the top forever, and that is it's pretty normal what City are going through after being so good for so long. 4 league titles on the trot was unprecedented; literally hasn't happened before. And so he's not surprised by what they're going through. So let's look about the team, a likely lineup for this particular match. I mean, there's quite a lot of decisions to be made. I mean, obviously Vicario in goal, and then I think the centre backs, with everyone else being injured, are obvious at Gray and Danso. It remains to be seen if Haaland will play, but if he does, obviously, Ange still thinks he's the sort of premier striker in world football. I think you can make a case for Alexander Isak, and Haaland's not been having the best season, but then he's still got amazing numbers, and he's still such a handful, so it will be a challenge. Gray was given, particularly in the early stages of that Ipswich game, a real runaround by Liam Delap, who of course was sold by City to Ipswich in the summer, and this will be another big test for him. I imagine Spence will go to left back and Udogie goes back to the bench with Porro at right back. They wouldn't want to rush Udogie too much, bring him back from injury. And to be honest, there's no real reason to change it. I think Porro and Spence have been performing well. Porro's had a break, or at least didn't start the game against Ipswich. Spence is in the form of his life right now, probably the most informed Tottenham player right now, so you should pick him. So those would be my back four. Midfield's a bit harder to call. I imagine Maddison comes back in. I reckon maybe Maddison, Bentancur, Bergvall. Bergvall is increasingly becoming a starter in the big games. He's really come on leaps and bounds, particularly in the last few months. He looks physically stronger. He's dominating games. Some of the dribbling and running that he had in the Ipswich game was so impressive. So I would be guessing that midfield, but that's not to say that Bissouma's been written off completely by Ange, and he was obviously given a rest against Ipswich, so maybe there's a chance that he comes in here. And obviously perhaps Sarr as well would be in the mix too, but that would be the three that I would imagine. And then up top, I think with that in mind, Kulusevski goes back to wide right, who I think that's where he's performed very, very well historically against the team. And this is a player that has told us specifically that he really gets up for the City games, in particular because he likes testing himself against the best. He's a player that Pep Guardiola has waxed lyrical himself about. So I imagine him on the right. Son had a good game, I thought, against Ipswich. He looked really effective. 2 brilliant assists, if assists matter. Those assists seemed like real, genuine, high-quality assists. I mean, the goal that Johnson scores for the first one doesn't happen without a brilliant step over and beating Ben Godfrey by Son, and then a brilliant pass across the box. That was vintage Son, vintage Postecoglou from last year. That style of play. So that was a brilliant assist, and I do think when you look at that, it clearly does matter. It's just when you talk about, as I said earlier, those ones that don't really contribute at all to build up to a goal being given. But yeah, I'd imagine he starts on the left again. Which would mean, I guess, Johnson comes out of the team. I guess he's just come back from injury. They're managing his minutes. I think he's been quite good off the bench, particularly against City in the past. Obviously scored in the 4-0. So I think he'd be more of an option off the bench, I would guess. And then I would think they would persevere with Tell through the middle. I don't think Scarlett comes in. Obviously Richarlison or Solanke aren't fit yet. And Ange is really sort of seems to be very focused on giving Tell what he sounds like he promised him, or as close to a promise when signing him, that he would get minutes, he would get time. He's getting a chance through the middle. I'd like to think that this game is where Tell we'd see a bit more of a bit more of an adaptation to the way Spurs play, a bit more of an adaptation to the league. Yes, it's very, very early and it seems a bit harsh. And in the embargo section, you might see later, I did ask about Tal on that front and sort of hold-up play. And I'm aware it's so early at the moment, you can't sort of judge him on that front, but it feels like something that he does need to adapt to, and it may take a bit of time on that front. But hopefully, of another week's training under his belt, a bit more time to adapt physically, and those minutes also under his belt from the games he's played so far, he can have a bit more of an effect in that role for this game. And Tottenham, as Ange pointed out, seem to play better against the bigger teams. I guess it's because those teams sort of look to play football, they don't try and stop Spurs as much, which means for a really entertaining game, which is what I'm expecting tomorrow. But if they can go and win this, it'll be 4 in the trot. It's definitely within their realms of their capabilities, and suddenly things are looking very, very promising going into a free weekend of the FA Cup and then AZ Alkmaar next weekend. So let's see what happens, and I'll speak to you after the game. Cheers, guys.